The National Weather Service.
Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
Good evening, I'm David Kramer here with your Alaska weather. As always, please visit our website, arh.noaa.gov. Get any updates to the forecast. You can check out watches, warnings, and advisories that we have out for the state. You can also call our weather info line at 1-800-472-0391. Getting updates to the forecast through that means as well. And you can follow us on Facebook, on Twitter, and on YouTube. So taking a look now at the warnings that we have out for the state, they're watches actually, and flood watches at that, and they expand anywhere from Cape Suckling down through the Yakutat area throughout much of the northern part of the Panhandle. That does include Sitka and Juneau up towards Skagway as well. Again, those are flood watches, and they are all in effect from 7 p.m. this evening until Tuesday evening. So look for some more updates to those this evening for more specifics on the exact timing that those will go out to. And there could be a lot of wind accompanied with that rain, as we have a lot of flow coming up from the southwest with a bigger system moving through the Gulf right now. And as that gets into there could be rainfall of rates up to as high as 1 inch per hour at times. That could really be leaves for some of that potential for the flooding in those areas. So again, look for some more updates if you're in any of those areas, especially on our website. Looking now for our fire danger, even with all the rain in the areas, we do have potential for some fire danger, and that's in the upper Tanana Valley in between Delta Junction and Northway up there. Looking at our satellite imagery now, we'll take a look at what's bringing all of that rain. We can see our main system with that main low starting to push towards the Alaska Peninsula, Bristol Bay area there. And as we watch this again, we can watch the really big moisture flux pushing a lot of that precipitable water towards the Alaska or the Gulf Coast now, and that's going to start to push off towards the east as we go out into the evening hours and overnight. And now as we look over the main part of the state, we do have a lot of cloud cover up there, but there is enough breaks in there for the potential for some thunderstorms through much of the interior, extending down to the Yukon Delta there and up towards the Arctic Village area as well. Then one more time we'll watch this loop starting off in the Bering Sea, and we do have a lot of that darker clouds. That means that there's a lot of lower cloud cover out there, a lot of stratus coming in as we have some high pressure trying to build in out over the Bering Sea with some fog in there as well, and some of that lower clouds extending out towards the western Bering and the western Aleutian Islands. So look at our weather for the remainder of the day. We do have that high pressure there extending in from the west with some areas of fog pushing out over much of the Bering Sea. A weaker wave trying to push into the western parts of the Bering, bringing in some rain, but not quite to the western Aleutian Islands yet. But as we look out further to the east, we can see that main low pressure system again starting to make its way along the Alaska Peninsula, Shelikof Strait area there. A lot of rain coming up with that system, already impacting places all around the south central, starting to bring some rain to areas along the Panhandle and some weaker showers in the southern parts of the Panhandle right now, but we are going to expect that whole system to push off towards the east. But ahead of that, we do have some potential for some afternoon thunderstorms pushing off into the evening along the Eagle area, extending up through much of the rest of the interior, including the upper Yukon Valley, and all the way down through the interior towards the Yukon Delta, especially in the higher terrain where those thunderstorms can trigger off the thunderstorms. We have another weaker low that is out towards the Kotzebue Sound area, bringing some rain to the western coastline all the way down into the YK Delta area. But in much of the remainder of the Brooks Range and Arctic coastline, not going to see a whole lot of activity this afternoon. However, as we move into the tonight hours, we are going to see that rain developing along the Arctic coastline with some areas of fog mixed in, and it's going to be cold enough in some places towards Barrow and the northern parts of the Brooks Range to see that mixing in with some snow. But for our main low pressure system has moved further off to the northeast towards the Prince William Sound area now, and now we can see the main part of that moisture flux really starting to push into the Panhandle area, bringing a lot of rain. Could be pretty heavy at times for those locations overnight. But our main low pressure system is still enough to bring a lot of rain to the south central as well, including areas all around Prince William Sound up towards the Alaska Range and into southern parts of the interior. On the backside of that low pressure system, that northwest flow bringing in some rain towards Kodiak Island, places around Bristol Bay. And in the evening hours, we are still going to see the potential for some of those thunderstorms developing from the Yukon Delta up through the interior into the upper Yukon Valley. And as those thunderstorms diminish later in the evening, we are going to have some fog developing overnight, especially in the morning hours through all of those same locations for much of the interior out towards the west coast as well. Seward Peninsula going to see some rain and fog out there, and that fog again along the Arctic coastline. As we move out over the Bering, a lot of our high pressure is starting to diminish, but we still have some of that weaker ridging pushing in. We're leaving some areas of fog and stratus underneath that and some weaker areas of rain on the Bering side along the Alaska Peninsula and eastern Aleutian Islands. Then our weaker shortwave coming in from the west is starting to bring some rain to the western Aleutians over the nighttime hours. Moving into Tuesday, just some lingering showers way out for the western Aleutians, with that weaker wave starting to push now towards the Pribilof Islands, bringing in some rain there as we get later in the Tuesday time frame, and some areas of fog still lingering, especially in the southern part of the Bering Sea. And as we look out to the south there, we can see the next system coming up from the south, that warm front out ahead of that one. And then back over our area into the Bristol Bay area, we do have some isolated showers for Tuesday expected there. But for the main part of the state, we do have a lot of rain coming into the south central and still hitting into the Panhandle area and starting to diminish as we get into the afternoon and evening hours there. But as we get into the afternoon and evening, then we have the potential for some thunderstorms extending as far south down around the Portage area in the mountains down there, up through the Talkeetnas and into the Alaska Range, potential for some thunderstorms in the afternoon. Then as we get out into the interior, you're going to still see some afternoon and evening thunderstorms expected for that Yukon Delta area throughout much of the interior, again going up towards the upper Yukon Valley. As we get into northern parts of the Brooks Range and up along the Arctic coastline, going to be cold enough to see a rain-snow mix there with some fog, especially as we get from Dead Horse further towards the east. Barrow will be a little bit exempt from that, staying a little bit more dry. Then as we get down to the Kotzebue Sound area, you're going to see some isolated rain showers there extending down into YK Delta area along the coastline especially. As we move into Wednesday, widespread showers throughout much of the interior down into the south central as well, with the only area expected to see thunderstorms in the afternoon out by the Eagle area. Still cold enough along the Brooks Range and further to the north to see some rain and snow, but again, Barrow will be pretty dry from that. But as we get closer to Dead Horse and further off towards the east, towards Kaktovik, expecting to see that rain and snow mix out there. Then down we have a new low pressure system in the northern part of the Gulf of Alaska, Prince William Sound area, bringing in some rain there and bringing a little bit more steady rain for places around the Panhandle, but not nearly as heavy as what we were seeing on Tuesday, with our old previous low now pushed off out over Canada. New high pressure system starting to build in over the eastern part of the Bering Sea, clearing out some areas along the coastline there into Bristol Bay, and some areas of fog developing as we get out over the eastern or western parts of the Bering, with another weak low coming in from the west. And then our other system moving up from the south pretty slowly, but starting to bring some rain into areas on the Pacific side of the Alaska Peninsula and for the Dutch Harbor area. Taking a look now at our temperatures as of this afternoon. Staying in the upper 50s to lower 60s out over the Panhandle, 63 there at Ketchikan, 59 for Yakutat. Upper 50s, lower 60s throughout the south central as well. And that's going to be a little bit colder there for Glen Allen, 51, and 52 for Valdez. As we move up into the interior, upper 50s, lower 60s for the most part in the interior, a little bit warmer there at Fairbanks, 67 degrees, and then colder as we get through the past 45 degrees there, and then down in the mid-30s as we get up along the Arctic coastline, with Dead Horse down around 34 this afternoon. As we get along the west coast of the state for the Kotzebue Sound area in the 50s there, in the mid to lower 50s for the Norton Sound, a little bit colder there at Gamble, 46 degrees this afternoon. Then down right around 55 degrees for many places along the YK Delta. Antioch 57 degrees. In the mid to upper 50s in the Bristol Bay Area, with the exception of King Salmon, a little bit warmer there, 64 degrees. And in the mid 50s to lower 60s for the most part in the Alaska Peninsula, with Sandpoint a little bit warmer, 68 degrees this afternoon. And then in the mid to lower 50s, getting colder as we get out towards the west for the Aleutians, 53 for St. Paul, 52 for St. George. Taking a look at our lows for tonight, we do have temperatures dropping down into the mid-40s along the Aleutian Islands and Pribilofs. And then as we get along the Alaska Peninsula, Bristol Bay Area, dropping right around 50 degrees. And then just below 50 as we get to the YK Delta area, and the mid-40s as we get into the Seward Peninsula area. And along the Arctic coastline, dropping down to right around freezing, with Barrow getting down just below freezing at 31 degrees expected low for tonight. Dropping down into the mid-50s for the most part in the interior. Pretty similar for the south central, with a little bit colder temperatures expected there at Glen Allen, 47 degrees, and then 54 degrees for Kodiak for a low tonight. Down in the mid to upper 50s for the most part in the Panhandle, while with a little bit warmer conditions down there by Craig at 60 degrees for a low tonight. So look at our highs for tomorrow, getting right around 60 for most places in the Panhandle, and then up into the lower to mid 60s for places around the South Central, with Kenai getting up to 66 degrees tomorrow, Talkeetna 65 degrees. Then up in the interior, upper 50s expected throughout most locations. Then as we move up to the Brooks Range, once again colder on the northern side. We are going to see temperatures down and are only getting up into the upper 30s for tomorrow. Kaktovik only getting up to around 39 degrees. Wainwright 39 as well. Getting up into the mid 50s as we get into the Kotzebue Sound area, and that's going to be pretty similar for the Norton Sound as well. Gamble only getting up to around 50 for a high for tomorrow. Mid 50s once again for the YK Delta area, and then up right around 60 degrees for the Bristol Bay Area, and into the mid 50s for the Aleutian Islands. Switch it up now, we'll take a look at our flying weather. Widespread MVFR conditions with some occasional IFR conditions out over the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands, with some high pressure and with that stratus and fog underneath that high pressure. We are going to expect those conditions throughout much of the area out west. As we move over mainland Alaska, some dispersed MVFR conditions with that system as it moves in from the Alaska Peninsula throughout much of the state out towards the east. Potential for some of those thunderstorms again for tomorrow afternoon. Then with our moisture transport moving into the Alaska Panhandle, we do have a lot of MVFR and IFR conditions expected there, with a lot of that heavier rain coming in this evening and into tomorrow. Then along the Arctic coastline, we are going to have some IFR conditions expected up there as well, with a lot of the lower ceilings and fog. Through the passes, AKwx should be MVFR for tomorrow, as well as Adigan Pass. And for Lake Clark and Merrill, both starting off marginal but improving to VFR as we move throughout the day. That'll be true of Rainy as well. For Windy, going to be MVFR conditions throughout the day, but in the afternoon time we do have the potential for some isolated thunderstorms along the mountains. As we move to Isabel Pass, MVFR conditions expected there, as well as Mentasta. And then down around Tanita Pass, marginal conditions expected throughout the day, and there is a potential for some isolated thunderstorms in the mountains in the afternoon, and that will be true of Portage as well. Going to be MVFR throughout the day, but a potential exists for some isolated thunderstorms in the afternoon hours. For Chilkoot and White, going to both start off IFR but improve to marginal conditions later in the day. Taking us now to our freezing levels, we have some warmer air coming up, pulled up by that system towards the Panhandle. And then out along the Arctic coastline, we can see our surface freezing line coming down closer towards Barrow, as we saw with the lower temps getting down to around 31 there, not a surprise. And some warmer air to the south of the Alaska Peninsula as well. And we see with those higher freezing levels, we also have pretty high icing above 12,000 feet, pretty widespread throughout much of the state. As that low pushes in, a lot of that's going to move off to the northeast as well. And then an area out over northern parts of the Bering Sea above 12,000 feet there. Taking us to our jet stream, we do have main part of our jet coming in out of Russia at 100 knots. That's going to pick up to around 120 knots as we get closer towards the Kodiak Island area, and then exit off towards the northeast out over Canada at 110 knots there. Main part of the state not going to see a whole lot of the stronger winds at this level, but we do have a weaker branch of the jet coming in at 70 knots, starting to make its way towards the eastern part of the Aleutian Islands to come back together with the main jet there at 120 knots. Dropping us down to 9,000 feet, a low out over northeastern Russia, but flow out over the Bering Sea out of a westerly direction, 15 to 20 knots for the most part. Picking up as we get out over the Gulf, getting as high as 50 knots there, and then as we move out over the Panhandle, we're going to see something around 60 knots there, so pretty windy conditions accompanying those rains out there, and then out over mainland Alaska, 10 to 25 knots coming in out of a northerly direction, strongest around our low pressure system. Down to 3,000 feet, pretty similar flow. We have our low out over the eastern part of the state with southwesterly flow coming in over the Panhandle. But here we have the strongest winds out over the Gulf dropping down to around 30 knots as we get out over the land. Northerly flow over the state, 15 to 25 knots. Again, strongest over the low. But as we move south towards the Cook Inlet area, you're going to see some stronger winds there out of that northwest direction, 40 knots. And then out over the Bering Sea, westerly flow expected, 15 to 20 knots there. Real quick look at our turbulence out over the Kodiak Island area, including Shelikof Strait and some areas along the Aleutian Range, below 5,000 feet expected, and then below 6,000 feet for the Panhandle. All of these areas are going to diminish throughout the day tomorrow. And we'll be back shortly with the marine forecast.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Mary O'Connor with the Alaskan Aviation Safety Foundation and the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health here in Anchorage. On behalf of Alaska Public Media, thank you for tuning into Hangar Flying. This evening, we are honored to have Dr. Bill Compton on the show. Bill is an accomplished pilot with over 10,000 hours and has airline transport pilot and flight instructor certificates. He owns a turbocharged VTOL Bonanza, which has flown all over Alaska and the world, and we were just counting, he's done over 20 solo oceanic flights. Dr. Compton is also a published author and has an article in the Safety Foundation's most recent newsletter. Welcome to the show, Bill.
Well, thank you, Mary.
We could talk to you about a lot of topics, and I promise we'll get you back on the show when we talk about your experience with long-distance flying and especially with leaning. In our efforts to focus on aviation safety for August, a month that has typically been one of the most dangerous for pilots in Alaska, I'd like to focus on an accident that occurred in Southeast Alaska in August of 2008. Can you describe the basic situation?
Well, this accident really aroused my interest because I had owned a Beechcraft B Baron and had experience with that airplane. And also, I have flown the coast 2 or 3 round trips a year since about 1974 or 5. And so I read this in the paper and I thought, well, gosh, I've got to figure out what happened here. And through a FOIA request, I got the tapes of the interaction between the pilot and air traffic control. And it was just fascinating. And so I got really wrapped up in it and analyzed it as best I could and wrote an article about it, and there we go.
And what happened in this situation? What was the pilot doing?
Well, the pilot was based in somewhere on the East Coast, I think Virginia or North Carolina, and he was flying to Alaska with a non-pilot friend to do a bunch of fishing. And this was the end of his second day of flying. He had spent the night in Cheyenne, Wyoming. And then he had stopped in Boise and in Bellingham, and then this flight up the coast. And by the time he got close to his destination, which apparently was Haines, he decided to land at Gustavus and shot an instrument approach there and landed. There he found no one at the airport to gas him. He felt like he'd made a mistake landing there, and his response was to take off, enter clouds, and call Anchorage Center for a clearance to Sitka. And then he threw in this little addendum at the end of his communication, quote, "I hope we have enough fuel," and unquote. And that just really shocked. Obviously, the air traffic controller, the lady taking care of him, and things went from bad to worse. And I think what really set off his confusion was that he had shot a GPS approach to Gustavus. Then he took off, and he was cleared to the Sisters Island VOR, and then was going to shoot an approach to Juneau. And that was to fly outbound on a radio of Sisters VOR. And he couldn't do it. And I believe the reason he couldn't do it was that he had a switch on his panel that switched his main navigation indicator between GPS and VOR. And I think it was still on GPS. And if it's on GPS and you're off course, rotating the omni-bearing selector cannot center the navigation needle. And he became more and more confused. And then finally it was, oh, the heck with it, I'll just head for Sitka. Well, he had diddled around. He was low on gas already, and he didn't make it to Sitka before he ran out of gas. And they crashed in a forested area, and they both died of impact injuries. So it was preventable in so many areas, but I think fatigue was a huge factor here. There may have been medical issues that with which he should not have been flying. I don't think he realized how long he'd been flying. He'd been following the sun through 3 time zones. And there we go. It's all right there.
We look forward to hearing more about this accident and in ways that it could have been prevented. I think that we're very fortunate to have you as our guest with your experience and insight, and we appreciate your willingness to share your information. We look forward to seeing you on our show next time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. It's been a pleasure.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you are not a member of the Alaskan Aviation Safety Foundation but would like to learn more about this accident, please send us an email at aasfonline@gmail.com, and we'll make sure you get a copy of the article. Please tune in to our next show when we talk with Dr. Compton about fatigue. Until next time, fly safely.
Welcome back for the marine forecast. We'll start off with a quick look at the sea surface temperatures. Things to know we have out over the Bering Sea, especially along the coastline here. We have been seeing that temperatures are starting to be on the decline, so we may have hit our peak already and starting to see those sea surface temperatures going back down. But we'll also note a tighter gradient of warmer temperatures up along the ice edge up there, and that comes into play as we look at the sea ice edge, as we have had some of our wind direction starting to shift. So over the next couple of days, we are going to see more northeasterly flow pulling the ice edge back down. But because of that warmer water, we are going to see that really start to slow, because even as it moves out, some of that ice is going to melt. So slowly going to move, could go up to 20 nautical miles as the wind starts to push out of the northeast direction, but the leading edge is going to take a while to actually progress. Then way out in the eastern part of the Beaufort Sea, we do have we had the westerly flow pushing the ice apart there, but now we are going to switch to a more easterly flow there as well. So over the next couple of days, starting to compact that ice back into the main ice pack. So look out for the main part of the marine forecast for Tuesday. For the southeast, we have a southwesterly or southerly flow as we get to the inside waters, getting up pretty strong as high as 40 knots as we get further to the north, out 25 to 35 knots out in the Gulf. Then we have seas getting up to as high as 16 or 17 feet in northern parts of the Gulf, 6 to 8 feet in the inside waters. For Wednesday, things starting to calm down to 15 or 20 knots for all locations, becoming more westerly. And we have seas down in the inside waters 3 to 4 feet, down to around 12 feet for the Gulf. For the south central part of the state, westerly flow anywhere from 20 to 35 knots, strongest out over the Gulf here as well. Weakest up in the northern part of Cook Inlet, southwesterly flow there 15 knots. And seas getting up to as high as 16 feet in the northern parts of the Gulf, but down around 3 to 4 feet for Prince William Sound. As we look out over Wednesday, flow becoming more northwesterly, 15 to 25 knots out in the Gulf, getting strongest west of the Barrens out of a westerly direction, 30 knots there. Seas up to as high as 8 feet there, and then picking up only a little bit up to 9 feet on the eastern side of the Barrens. But down through Cook Inlet, only around 2 to 3 feet. As we look out over the Alaska Peninsula, primarily a westerly flow there, 20 to 25 knots, strongest as we get out towards the east. Seas strongest on the Pacific side, 9 to 11 feet there on Tuesday. Then on Wednesday, flow becoming much more light and variable, 10 to 15 knots with seas strongest on the Pacific side, once again 5 to 6 feet there. For the Aleutian Islands, variable flow 10 knots on the Bering side, and out of a northeasterly flow on the Pacific side around 15 knots, seas up to as high as 6 to 7 feet there. Then out over the western Aleutian Islands, southwesterly flow around 10 knots. Then on Wednesday, things picking up a little bit, southwesterly flow continuing for the western Aleutian Islands up to as high as 25 feet, or 25 knots now with 6 feet for seas. As we move out towards the east, we have easterly flow, 15 to 20 knots, seas getting up to as high as 8 feet on the Pacific side. As we look out along the west coast, westerly flow, 15 to 20 knots, seas up to around 4 to 5 feet on Tuesday. Then on Wednesday, going to remain with that around 15 knots there, but becoming more variable, even becoming northerly as we get closer to the Bering Strait, and seas around 3 to 4 feet. Along the Arctic coastline, northeasterly flow through most locations, getting up to as high as 30 knots as we get closer to Point Hope. And then we have seas up to as high as 8 feet in that location as well, dropping down to 3 to 4 feet along the Arctic coastline. Then on Wednesday, that northeasterly flow continuing, but dropping down to 10 feet with 2 feet for seas, and northerly flow along the west coast, 20 knots there with 6 feet for seas. Quick recap out for tonight's weather. A lot of fog and stratus under some ridging out over the Bering Sea, but our main system low moving through now the Prince William Sound area overnight, going to continue to progress towards the northeast, but bringing in a lot of moisture transport to the Panhandle area, going to bring us some flood watches 7 p.m. this evening until Tuesday evening, but a lot of rain throughout the south central with some thunderstorms in the evening hours from the Yukon Delta up to the upper Yukon Valley, and we are going to see rain and fog along the Arctic coastline with some areas of snow in the Brooks Range. And with Alaska weather, I'm David Kramer. Thanks for being with us tonight.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.